Hey guys, this is retyopko of the Worldwide Duelists, and welcome to another fantastic Decklist video. This video is coming from the Los Angeles Regional that took place just this past weekend, December 5th, and as you can see, the first place decklist from that event is Heroes. If you recall from a few months back, I did a decklist video on the deck that won the previous LA Regional, and it was also Heroes. So it's really interesting that the same exact deck ended up taking first place at both events several months apart. And several months apart also means separate ban lists. So for this particular ban list, Reinforcement of the Army was limited back to 1, which was not the case in the previous hero deck list. As a matter of fact, I can view that hero deck list very easily, 3 Rota. So it's interesting to see some of the build changes that happened. Obviously, it was 2 different players that ended up winning first place, but it's interesting that it was the same exact deck, or the same, theme, heroes, whatever. Not the same exact build, but the same exact deck. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the deck list. I don't want to keep you guys waiting for too long. So first off, we're going to start with the monsters. We have 10 monsters in total, most of which are elemental heroes. By most of which I mean 6 out of the 10, so this is still a majority. 2 elemental hero Bubbleman, which I believe is fairly standard. I don't know a whole lot about heroes still. It's not really a deck that I've played a lot of. But you can see some interesting tech choices here and there. So 2 Bubbleman, 3 Shadow Mist, because Shadow Mist the best until we get Stratos back. So interesting tech here is, of course, Elemental Hero Wildheart, which this card is unaffected by trap cards, 1500 beater. So this is just an interesting choice. I wouldn't necessarily consider the meta trap heavy at the current moment. Although there are certainly decks that play mini traps, but I wouldn't necessarily consider the meta as a whole trap heavy, especially when our current version of Performant Pals doesn't generally run a whole lot of traps. Usually it's in the 5 and under range from what I've seen. So it's an interesting choice to run Wildheart. Wildheart also gives you access to Masked Hero Dion, which is a very strong monster. It's an OTK enabler in a lot of cases. So it's kind of interesting to know that he ran Wildheart. I wouldn't say the card on its own is particularly strong, but giving you access to Dion is on its own pretty strong. 2 Goblinberg. This number you can see being reduced from 3 in a lot of deck lists because of the Reinforcement of the Army limit. This card is no longer searchable except by your 1 copy of Rhoda. So having 3 of it, like, you only really need to search it once and then be done with it. And your Rhoda search is generally going to be for the Goblinberg. And this is, again, just basing off of what I've seen. Feel free to correct me in the comments if you feel differently, or perhaps if you have a little more experience with heroes. And then 2 Summoner Monk obviously goes well with the 16 spells that are present in the deck. And you can get a free summon for Shadow Mist and do neat plays. 3 copies of A Hero Lives. I believe this mirrors the other hero deck list that I have covered. Obviously a really good card to open with because it'll get you your free Shadow Mist and you actually make plays. 1 copy of Book of Moon, which is something I'd consider another tech card. It's okay in this particular meta. I personally probably would have ran Compulsory Evacuation Device in its place because Book of Moon can tend to make you minus, because flipping a monster face down doesn't get rid of the threat, whereas Compulsory can at least get rid of some threats, and it's also an out to Plushfire. Book of Moon will, however, allow you to get Dion's effect off most of the time, considering most monsters have a lower defense than they do in attack. So this card is just an interesting choice, not necessarily something I would have played, especially in this current meta when things that do target are kind of lackluster, but I can kind of see why you would play it in place of something like Compulsory Evacuation Device. 2E Emergency Call. This is actually a pretty obvious choice when you consider that you can't play all 3 copies of Reinforcement of the Army anymore. So playing 2 of these gives you some of your searching back. Obviously you can't search for the Goblinberg, but being able to search for your hero monsters is still going to be helpful in a lot of situations. 3 Forbidden Lance. Darklaw is a tiny puny guy with only 2400 attack, and also Forbidden Lance can function to keep him on the field. So having that dual purpose, again, this isn't really what I'd consider a trap-heavy meta. There's not a whole lot of decks running around that do play the 10 plus traps, although obviously the deck list you're looking at is an exception, but Forbidden Lance is an interesting choice. It will help your Darklaw to stay on the field. It helps the longevity of Darklaw a lot of the time, so it kind of makes sense as to why this person ended up running 3 of those. 2 Instant Fusion for the 2 Elder Entity Norden that is in the extra deck. This card is just basically an enabler to extend your plays. It's always nice to have more options, and this always is going to give you more options unless you have to stop your play short through something like Veiler, Maxi, any sort of effect negation, or something that you don't want to let your opponent plus off of. But most of the time it's going to let you extend your play into any number of rank 4s, or you can even extend your play into Ptolemaeus, which this guy is running, so Instant Fusion is kind of an obvious choice. I'm not sure I would run this card at 3, considering that you only do run 10 main decked monsters. Just given the ratios, you might likely draw an Instant Fusion before you even see a monster at that point, so running 2 makes sense in this specific situation. 3 Mass Change, pretty obvious. This allows you to go into your Masked Heroes, which are incredibly strong, so in this case it makes sense. Raigeki isn't necessarily something that I would run in decks other than this. However, because of the existence of Masked Hero Darklaw, this card makes complete sense. In the Cosmo matchup, if you get your Darklaw on the field and then Raigeki them, their ships aren't going to be able to float, they're just going to get banished instead. So Raigeki ends up being a pretty strong play in that specific situation. There are situations where you won't want to see the Raigeki, but when you do have Darklaw up, it just makes for a really powerful play. And then the 1 copy of Reinforcement of the Army, I shouldn't really have to explain why this would be run. Searches 8 out of your 10 monsters, so it seems kind of brainless. You definitely want to play this. On to the traps, of which there are 14, which, again, I mentioned before, there aren't a whole lot of 10 plus trap, or there's not a whole lot of decks that are running 10 plus traps that are going around right now. However, in this case, not counting the trap stuns, because they aren't necessarily something that is going to actually stun your opponent, which is ironic considering the name. Minus those, he is still playing 11 what I would consider like actual traps, so I would consider that fairly trap heavy. 14 out of your 40 cards is, a fair percentage of your deck. So 1 Bottomless Trap Hole. Bottomless is just a good card. Bottomless Ignister, always fun. I wish you could Bottomless Plush Fire. Rest in peace. 1 copy of Call of the Haunted. Now, this is something that is interesting to me, only playing 1 copy of Call of the Haunted. Other hero deck lists I've seen have played more copies of this, because you can end phase on your opponent's turn, get your Shadow Mist, or you can just bring a Darklaw back, I think. Can you? No, I lied. You can't bring Darklaw back. I can't read. But being able to end phase, bring your Shadow Mist back, search a Mass Change, it's just another way of extending your plays like Instant Fusion. Although with this, I believe you can bring Norden back with it. Yes, you can bring Norden back with Call of the Haunted to extend your plays pretty far. 1 copy of Grand Horn of Heaven. It's interesting not seeing this card main decked, because I can see a lot of players main decking this card nowadays. It's really incredibly strong, especially say you hit a Pendulum summon of 4 or 5 with it. They get all their monsters to the graveyard. They don't get the Pendulum recurability. They have to end their main phase, so they can't pull off any more plays before the battle phase. And that draw 1 card isn't really a big deal, considering you just killed all their recurabilities. So the interesting thing about this is that in the main and the side deck, you only do see the 1 copy. I would kind of expect to see more copies of this card, because it's really strong. It's a really good card, and I can totally expect to see more deck lists running this card in the main deck. But as it stands now, the 1 copy is just a tech. I'm really surprised that this guy didn't end up running more copies, but 1 copy is a pretty neat tech, especially since it can catch people off guard, and when you combo it with Darklaw, the draw doesn't even matter. So just kind of surprising that this guy only decided to play one. The card itself isn't really a strange inclusion, but not having more than the one is kind of strange to me personally. 2 copies of Mirror Force, which again, Darklaw, it makes it so that any floating that they would get off of the destruction of their monsters isn't going to take place if you have the Darklaw on the field. So they essentially become a second and third copy of Raigeki if they attack into you. Not a lot of people would even be expecting vanilla Mirror Force in this meta, so people might attack into you thinking it's a Storming Mirror Force and be, not afraid at all. But then you flip regular Mirror Force with your Darklaw on the field, and suddenly they're like, oh shit. 1 copy of Solemn Morning, totally, I have no idea why you wouldn't run this card in this meta. The 2,000 life points, either you'll be able to stop like a huge pendulum summon, or an Ignister, or the summon of a Cosmo Pilot. Anything like that is amazing, and the 2,000 life points, if they do manage to still have plays outside of it, then you were probably dead in the water anyways, so being able to stop cards at crucial times is pretty fantastic, especially when it's huge pendulum summons. 3 copies of Trap Stun, which 3 copies of Trap Stun plus 3 copies of Forbidden Lance almost seems like overkill to me, although I can understand why you would play it because it will give you that OTK ability. That said, I probably would have cut the numbers down on the Trap Stun at the very least. This is, again, personal tech opinions, but I'm not sure 3 was the right choice. Obviously it was the right choice for this event because the guy ended up getting first place, but I wouldn't necessarily have run 3. And then for the last 5 traps, we have the one of Vanity's Emptiness. Vanity's is really, really strong right now, especially since you can put Darklaw on the field and then flip this up. And then this guy is playing 2 Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare and 2 Void Trap Hole. Now, on their own, these cards aren't necessarily always going to be super strong. They were strong a little bit ago, but now they wouldn't necessarily be so strong because of the Cosmo ships floating and stuff like that. However, again, having Darklaw on the field and then having one of these cards is really, really strong. Being able to stop the floating of their monsters, which is pretty much the main reason why these cards wouldn't be amazing, being able to stop their floating is such a huge deal. So having a Darklaw on the field and then setting one of these is just putting yourself into a really good position. Now let's move on to the side deck. So the side deck is going to start off with 2 vanilla Cyber Dragons. This card has been picking up popularity as well as the card that it is paired with, which is Chimera Tech Fortress Dragon. This card just offers you an incredibly easy out to any Cosmo ship. You summon the Cyber Dragon, they don't get to float, it gets sent to graveyard and doesn't get banished like a lot of other removal, and now you have at least a 2,000 beater on your side of the field. So this is a combo that has been picking up a lot of speed. I've seen a lot of people either putting these in the extra deck or side decking them to swap with their extra deck in order to pair with Cyber Dragon and take down Cosmo ships. 1 copy of Elemental Hero Prisma strikes me as kind of strange. Again, I almost get the feeling that this guy just needed 1 extra card to put into his side deck. I would have sided that 2nd copy of Grandhorn, but Prisma, since I don't have enough experience with heroes, I'm not certain what combos it would enable. But I'm sure it has the ability to enable some extra combos that you might not normally be able to do. That said, I kind of feel, once again, it was just a throw in, shit, I need an extra card for my side deck, throw in a Prisma, done. 2 Maxi, which is just a really good card right now. In general, it's pretty strong against Cosmo, and it's pretty strong against our current version of Performa Pals, so you can get a lot of use out of this card. Surprising it's not comboed with some other sort of hand trap. This is the only hand trap in the entire deck. Usually when playing Maxi, you see a lot of people running something like Curry Photon, or, even Swift Scarecrow and Battle Fader, although not as often, or things like Ghost Ogre, Veiler, any other sort of hand trap that you could run with Maxi, you see often. Often you don't really see the Maxi just by itself. So That's an interesting decision, although I can understand why. Space is kind of tight. I wouldn't really want to cut away from the extra deck, except for maybe the Samurai for like a Chimera tech, and then like, do you keep the second one so your second Cyber Dragon isn't going to be dead? Like, there's just a lot of deck building decisions that kind of go around making space for more hand traps that I can understand why they weren't made. 3 copies of MST, because you should pretty much always have 3 copies of MST main boarded or side boarded. Somewhere between the main and the side, you should have all 3 of them. 2 copies of Mind Crush. This card is incredibly strong with Dark Claw, especially because, well, pretty much just because you Mind Crush them, their card gets banished instead of going to the graveyard. So that's pretty strong. 3 copies of Typhoon. This is another card that has been picking up a whole bunch of speed. You see this in a lot of people's side decks nowadays, and that's because it's a really good first turn hand trap versus Performapals. They play their 2 scales, and you activate Typhoon from your hand, or you activate it and chain to a Wavering Eyes to pop one of their scales. They only get the 500 damage, they don't get the search. So Typhoon is a pretty incredibly strong card right now. I would say it's even better than Ghost Ogre for what it does. I would say the only deck that could probably run Ghost Ogre better is Cosmos, because they can summon it through E-Telly. That only does a little bit of play extension, like going into things such as Ancient Fairy Dragon can be pretty good though. So there's just some considerations to be made. Typhoon is probably the better card at the current moment. And then the 2 copies of Chimera Tech, which I already mentioned, pair with the Cyber Dragon. Finally, let's move on to the extra deck. We've only got a few more cards to go over. 2 copies of Elder Entity Norden to go with the instant fusions. These are pretty, you should run these. In fact, a lot of the cards in the side deck, the extra deck are kind of like, why would you not run this in this situation? A lot of them are pretty staple. The only 2 that I think would be super questionable would be Karn Gorgon, Anti-Luminescent Knight, and Gaga Samurai. Those 2 cards could be considered tech rather than being staples, but regardless, Masked Hero Acid, good for burning through back row. Activating a trap stun on like 3 or 4 back row and then going into Acid is pretty fun. Masked Hero Anki, because it gives you OTK enabling, which is pretty neato. So using Anki and Dark Claw basically just enables you to OTK a lot better, to my understanding. And sometimes Anki just is the better decision over Dark Claw. Rather than just going into Dark Claw and turtling the Dark Claw, you can go into Anki, have a little bit of a stronger monster, put some pressure on your opponent. So, and then the Masked Hero Dion, which once again goes with the Wild Heart being Earth attribute, and its effect, if you haven't read it before, is actually really strong. When it destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 level 4 or lower hero monster from your deck. So, meaning you can destroy a monster with this, summon a Shadow Mist, activate the Shadow Mist effect to search a mass change, and then use the mass change to go into Dark Claw or Anki. So this is where a lot of your OTK potential is going to come from, is using a mass change on Wild Heart. You'll be able to punch for a lot of damage per turn using this combination. And then we move on to rank 4s, most of which, once again, are staple. Abyss Dweller, a lot of people wouldn't even go to an event without an Abyss Dweller. It's just all around a really solid rank 4. Karn Gorgon, Anti-Luminescent Knight, again, I would consider this card more tech than being a staple. It's useful in some situations, but it's pretty situational. Being in a situation where, say, you have a Dark Claw on the field and getting a Karn Gorgon out, you're going to have something such as, why can't I think of it? Oh, you're going to have Instant Fusion in order to enable plays like that for the most part, which you're not always going to have. So I kind of feel like this card, you're not ever just going to go into Karn Gorgon. You're going to make your Dark Law and then Instant Fusion into it, which just requires more cards in hand to be able to go into this and have it be good. Castel, totally staple, no reason not to run it. Pleiades is kind of interesting. There's a few things I can think of that would probably take this spot better, like Exciton Knight, no. Number 101 would be my first thought, although this might just be straight better in a lot of situations than number 101, especially because both cards do target but being able to bounce cards is a little stronger than stealing some specific monsters. And you can go into it pretty easily with Ptolemaeus and Instant Fusion, so it makes sense as to why you would want to run Pleiades. Doubly so because you can end phase, use Ptolemaeus, attach the diamond, and then detach 3, so you have, I believe, a 2 material Pleiades instead of a 1 material Pleiades. So you can just do some neat things with it. Daigusto Emerald, which again, pretty much a staple, especially considering that this deck is only running 10 monsters. If you happen to go through all of your monsters, you're going to want to have a way to recycle them. I can't talk today. Gagaga Samurai is definitely a tech. This card is going to be, again, OTK enabling. The only thing about Gagaga Samurai is that it doesn't provide anything extra. As a matter of fact, I would have even gone so far as to run Blade Armor Ninja in place of Gagaga Samurai, because most of your main deck cards are warriors. Which might have just been better in some situations. It's only an extra 600 damage, but often if you go for a game like that, that 600 damage can make a really big difference. Like, the difference between having a Gagaga Samurai on the field with a Dark Claw and a Blade Armor on the field with a Dark Claw is just a lot of extra damage that you'll be able to do. Last 2 cards are Stellar Knight, Constellar Diamond, kind of a no-brainer to run when you run Ptolemaeus, because you can either stick it over it and stop, like, BA, for example, or you can just attach it as a material to make your Pleiades bigger. So, all these cards kind of make sense. Outside of the Gagaga Samurai, I really think Blade Armor could have taken its place better, but in the end, this guy ended up winning LA Regionals, which is generally the biggest regionals in the country. And I did not, so, certain deck decisions kind of are up to who played the deck. So, thank you all for watching this wonderful video by the Worldwide Duelist. If you have not already, go ahead and check out our other content, and if you like what you've seen here, go ahead and like this video, and subscribe to our channel if you're looking for more of the same stuff. And if you have any questions or comments about my analysis of this deck list, please leave them. I appreciate all constructive criticism, as do all the other members of Worldwide Duelists. We appreciate everything that you guys have to say. So thank you very much for watching this video, and remember, you guys keep the world turning.